Welcome to this event today. We have an hour together, so I will try to keep the introduction short so we have as much time as possible for your questions and Carolina's answers at the end of the presentation. Today we are talking about things that you can actually also find in our expert paper, which you can find on our website. I will be sharing links and resources after the event, so don't worry about it now. I have actually previously shared the link to this expert paper with you, so you have that if you want to look at it. This event is organized by the European Network for the Work with Perpetrators of Domestic Violence. We were founded in 2014, and we are proud to currently unite 69 member organizations from 34 European countries. We work to prevent violence in close relationships as a gender-based phenomenon. We want to foster gender equality. We want to improve the safety of women and their children, as well as others at risk from violence in close relationships. And we do that through promoting effective work with those who perpetrate this violence, mainly men. Our goal is to support the development of accountable, effective, victim-centered, and gender-informed perpetrator work across Europe. In a nutshell, I mean, tiny little goal. We have a bunch of resources on our website, among which today's expert paper, which you can find in the resources and then expert papers. Just take a look at our website, chock-a-block full of so many amazing resources. Today I need to switch around my shares. Today we are joined by an amazing speaker. We had the luck to hear her speak at our annual conference last year, Carolina Øverlien, who is a professor of social work at Stockholm University and a lead researcher at the Norwegian Center for Violence and Traumatic Stress Studies. She has researched youth intimate partner violence for many years and is currently leading the 3-year research project Drawing the Line on Sexual Youth Intimate Partner Violence at the Center for Violence and Traumatic Stress Studies in Oslo. This project focuses on young perpetrators and victims, as well as the justice system and schools' understanding and handling of this violence. This is my introduction. I'll stop sharing my screen. We are perfectly on time. Carolina, over to you.
Amazing. On second. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. Okay.
Yes, we can see your screen.
You can see that. Excellent. So thank you very much for that introduction. So nice. And the picture was taken this summer, I saw, because we all look kind of, we've been on vacation, we're a bit tanned, it's still summer outside, and now it's the middle of the winter. Anyhow, so such a privilege to be here. I really do mean that. And with people from all over the world, really. I didn't expect that. I sort of thought of Europe, but it's fantastic that you've been able to gather people from different parts of the world. So my name is Carolina Øverlien. I'm a head of the research at my institute in Oslo that is doing research on violence and trauma on children and adolescents. And then I'm a professor of social work at the Department of Social Work, Stockholm University in Sweden. So I've been doing all my professional adult life. I've been doing research on violence and trauma, and and children and adolescents. And people are saying, like, yeah, so you've been doing this now for many, many years. How do you survive sort of all these years doing this really demanding topic, but the thing is, and I'm sure I share this with many of you who are listening, there's so much to do on our field. So I really feel like we can still contribute. There's so much new knowledge that we need. And of course, so many, this is real problems with real people. And it's so many pressing issues that we need to deal with. So I feel very fortunate to have been able to do this for all my professional life, research on violence and trauma and on children and adolescents. And today I'm talking about a topic that you would think had been researched a lot, and it really hasn't. On the domestic violence and intimate partner violence field, there's actually quite limited knowledge that we have on what it does to children and adolescents in terms of schooling. The vast majority of research that we've done in terms of children, adolescents, and violence in their close relationships has to do with health. And it's been very, very important research done there. But I would say that we need to broaden our field a bit more and also include issues such as what it does to their schooling and their academic achievements. So that's what we're focusing on here today. Educational sabotage, a form of abuse against children and youth with potentially long-term consequences. And let me start with very briefly just say something about the terms and concepts on our field, because I think that's really important that we start with that. Okay, and now nothing happens when I press that. Why didn't? Okay.
You might just have to click into the presentation. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, can move now. So I just need to close down the comments that come here, and because then otherwise I don't see my. Okay. So intimate partner violence, and I included youth here, but CDC really is defining an intimate partner violence. They define it, and CDC stands for. And I just lost it the second. Yeah, it's coming back to me. Physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, and psychological aggression, including coercive tactics by a current or former intimate partner, i.e. spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, dating partner, and ongoing sexual partner. Center for Disease Control, CDC. I like this definition, although the term aggression, I'm not too sure about. I would have preferred perhaps abuse there, psychological abuse. But I like the fact that they are very clear about the boyfriend, girlfriend part, i.e. this is not just an adult problem, but also something that happens in younger persons' relationships. Children experiencing domestic violence, and I do prefer that term to exposed, and I've been writing quite a bit on that, why I think that we should use the term children experiencing to really, and there's many reasons. One reason is that it underlines children's subjective status, sort of, in this. And I've defined that as seeing, hearing about, and experiencing the consequences of the physical, psychological, sexual, material, and financial violence and abuse that one of their parents or caregivers expose the other parent and caregiver of. Okay. Okay, and if we say something about children experiencing DV or DVA, domestic violence and abuse, and the intimate partner violence, these two issues. I'd like to say that in several countries in the global north, it's estimated that approximately 5% of children experiencing domestic violence and abuse regularly. And studies have shown that young people experience as much as or even more intimate partner violence than adults in their own intimate or romantic relationships. And in a study that I myself conducted with colleagues in Sweden, 6% of girls and 3% of boys in high school reported repeatedly being exposed to physical violence. So now we asked about all kinds of violence and both single incidents, but also repeatedly. I just now picked out the statistics on repeated and the physical violence. So just one word about that. Violence and abuse in children and adolescents' lives is a gendered issue. There are more girls than boys who report being victims of abuse. That doesn't mean that boys are not victims, but there's more girls, and that is especially true when it comes to repeated violence, what we could call serious or potentially lethal violence. And also especially sexual violence. If you look at all forms of different kinds of violence, the sexual violence is especially gendered. Experiencing domestic violence and abuse and or intimate partner violence involves several risks, including health, social, cognitive, and educational, both short and long term. And like I said in the beginning, we know quite a bit about that, and especially the health aspect of it. And the cognitive part, we know less about the social implications and even less about the educational. So I'm glad we got to focus on that today. Okay, sometimes it's moving and sometimes not. Okay, here we go. Educational sabotage. So what is that then? What are we talking about today? Well, we're talking about the disruption of academic efforts and focus, affecting all aspects of a pupil or a student's efforts to obtain educational credentials, as well as disrupting play and interaction with peer and adults in school. So I think that it's important that we remember that it's not only that it disrupts their capacity and possibilities to learn and achieve things and get good grades and all that, but it also affects their interaction with peers and other adults in school. And school is really important arena for that, where children learn social skills and they play. And we know that playing is really important for traumatized children. They go through a lot by playing, and they go through their difficult experiences by playing. So it's really important that kids can do that in school. And so the violence they experience disrupts all of this and not just the academic efforts. I would like to say that the term educational sabotage, I definitely should not take all credits for that term, for sure not. There have been others who have used it before me. And I'd especially like to point out Maria Pantaraki at Queen's University in Northern Ireland in Belfast. She has done brilliant work on this and used the term. And then, of course, Rachel Fott-Schrag at the University of Texas in Arlington, USA. And I will refer to her later. She has also done really, really good work on this. So they are the ones, I think, that use the term educational sabotage, that I think is really a really good useful term. Some background on the importance of education for victimized children and young people. So education, I think we can agree upon, is one of the most protective factors against negative outcomes of growing up with domestic violence and abuse and intimate partner violence. The Istanbul Convention is very clear that victims of IPV must have access to services such as education. And the Istanbul Convention they do include young people as well, or like adolescents, and not just the adult women, and also the issue of education. And of course, the UNCRC state clearly that all children and young people, regardless of life circumstances, have a right to education. So they don't only need an education to develop and to do well in life, but they also have a right to it. And then all schooling is acquired step by step. So disruptions at a certain point in children's lives can have long-term effects, in addition, of course, to causing difficulties at the time when it occurs. But if it's disrupted when they're in 6th grade, that can have implications all the way up through to university, because it's really acquired step by step. Article 9 in the convention says that state parties recognize the right of children to education. And in Article 29, they focus on the aims of education and say that governments agree that the education of a child shall be directed to the development of a child's personality, talents, and mental and physical abilities to their fullest potential. So this really includes all children, regardless of their life situation, regardless if they're in refugee camps or in shelters of refugees for abused women and children, regardless of where they are in their life circumstances, they do have this right. Very recently, this review came, and it was fantastic when it came, because I haven't seen it before. It's Maria Pantaraki, you see her name here again, and Lucia Klenkakova, who, by the way, and I'm looking at a note here I have now, because Lucia Klenkakova will deliver her thesis, her PhD thesis, within the next few weeks. It will be called Exploring the Role of the Education Sector in Addressing Intimate Partner Violence Among Young People in Northern Ireland. So this is actually the first PhD thesis that I've seen on this topic of educational sabotage. So I just thought I wanted to tell you that. I think that's very, very exciting. They did a systematic review of the literature, and again, there's not much done on this topic. So they look through huge amount of publications, but they ended up with very few articles, actually. But what these few articles did say was the following. So they looked at consequences of intimate partner violence on young people's educational well-being. And they saw that some of the implications were failing grades, truancy, latency and dropout, declining aspirations when it comes to attending college, finishing high school, and the long-term effects was decline in years of education and economic prosperity. And there's actually studies that have been done that can show exactly that there's a number of years, they've been able to count that out, that there's a number of years that these kids actually lose when it comes to education and sort of fall behind. Another article with another researcher that I just told you about, Rachel Bottrug, she wrote an article called School Sabotage as a Form of Intimate Partner Violence, Providers' Perspectives. And what they did was that they interviewed people who worked in services for college students and asked for their experiences of supporting young persons in college who had been victimized by intimate partner violence. So interviews with service providers for college students. These service providers told them about physical violence or stalking in school, destroying homework and school supplies, and inducing guilt in relation to the victim's school success. And of course, all these things had quite serious consequences, such as decreased attendance and dropping out of school, lack of focus and concentration, and decreased emotional health. And then I come to my own article that I wrote together with a colleague and published a couple of years ago. It was called School as a Context for Youth Intimate Partner Violence, Young Voices on Educational Sabotage. So the basis or the research that we based this on, that research was called Violence and Abuse in Young People's Intimate Relationships, Prevalence, Associated Factors, and Youth Own Voices. And we ask in this article, what role does the school environment play as a context for youth intimate partner violence, and what implications does it have in their everyday lives? The data was qualitative interviews with young people aged 17 to 23 who were victims of youth intimate partner violence. And we also had a survey that we distributed to over 1,000 students aged 15 to 21. And we analyzed them with a Brown and Clark thematic analysis and some simple frequency tables. So if we look at the quantitative data here first, we asked how many had experienced intimate partner violence at school premises and who did they tell about this? That was some of the questions we asked in our survey. 10% of the young people who said they had experiences of abuse in their own intimate relationships reported that it took place in school. The sexual violence took place in school, I'm sorry. 54% of the students with experiences told a peer about the violence. So the majority of students actually did tell someone about the violence, but they did tell a peer as someone of their same age. And only 1 to 3% of victimized youth told a teacher, a school nurse, or a school counselor. And when I present these numbers to school staff especially, they all come up to me afterwards and say, no, that can't be true. There's so many who come to me and tell me about, and that's excellent. But when we actually ask young people in a survey, very few say that they have actually told a teacher or someone in school about their experiences, even though we know that some of these experiences do take place in school. We asked what implication does the violence have on the victim's everyday life and their academic achievement. That was one of the qualitative questions that we asked the young victims. And what they tell us that many of them, and these are some of what one of my colleagues have been writing about, is she's calling it the youth-specific factors, some specific things that has to do with young people. They are in school, and some of them are in school with their abuser in the same school. So the closeness to the abuser is really difficult for these young people. And one girl told us that she called him the ever-present silent threat. So they're somewhere around there in school all the time, and they're constantly afraid of them. And of course, this can have implications on their concentration, of feelings of fear, and relationship with others. The young people told us about high non-attendance. They were skipping school a lot. They were leaving school premises to check on the abuser. They were too fearful to be there, etc., etc. And also negative effects on relationship with peers. And I have a couple of quotes here now, examples of this. One girl said, well, schooling didn't go particularly well. I was in a bad shape mentally, but it got worse because of this dark, horrible secret that I couldn't tell anyone. And I don't think a lot of people know so much about it because it's so shameful and nobody can relate to it.
So Carolina, just to let you know, we're at 28.
I know, I saw that. Thank you. Another girl said, I went to school and people were like, fucking whore. Everyone knew who I was. And there was all these rumors going around that I asked them to hit me and stuff, which wasn't true. It was a heavy load to carry. So the kids who experience domestic violence and abuse, they are also fearful of in school, but not because their abuser is in school, because it's usually the father and he is at home or at work, but they're afraid that their father will find them in school. So one girl was afraid that he will come and take her away from there. And this other boy was fearful that his father would see him play out in the schoolyard, and he then tried to get help from teachers to support him and protect him from this. Many kids do a lot of things to try to find ways to find strategies to help themselves, sort of, but also find ways to support and help their mothers. So they go home and check on the mothers. But their home environment is difficult. It's also very difficult to get help with schoolwork there, for example. They have a lot of lack of sleep, and they have intrusive thoughts, and there's a lot of fears of going home after school. So they do skip school a lot in order to feel safe. So I'm just skipping ahead here because I think this is important. So let me say something. I was asked to say something about implications and what we can sort of take out of this. And it's hard because we're from all over the world, and I'm from the Nordic countries. I'm from Norway and Sweden. But I would like to say a few words from a sort of a Nordic or a Norwegian-Swedish perspective. I think it's really important that children and young people can't fend for themselves in school. We have to help them to find ways to feel safe in school so that they can learn and they can thrive. There needs to be better cooperation between schools, the child protection services, and refugees. There need to be better safety measures in school, and that has to be developed with school staff and parents, the non-abusive parents, and also you have to include the children in the safety planning. The UNCRC and the Istanbul Convention must be taught in school, and there must be interactive aspects of that also include active child participation. So, okay, this was last quote, Anna, is that okay? What do the children and young people wish for themselves? This one girl that I interviewed said, well, I've thought about that a lot. And I think knowledge needs to be much more accessible, a lot more accessible. This needs to be covered in schools, sex education. They need to talk to the guys. Guys are behind like 98% of all violence. Like, talk about it, have discussions. There are these lectures about drugs. There should be also about healthy relationships. And kids in Norway and Sweden do get a lot of lectures also from people coming from the outside society and talk about drugs and substance abuse. And I think she has a really good point here. We also need to talk about healthy relationships. So thank you very much. I have references to everything I've said today, and I'll be happy to share that if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Yeah, we're back with all of the black squares and some of the faces. Hi. You're welcome to leave the black square. That's totally fine. So this is now the Q&A part of our event. You already shared some questions with us during the sign-up process, which I have ready to go. Then we have some questions in the chat. But you're also totally welcome to, as I said, in the reaction buttons, raise your hand, ask a question, or even if you want to also, you can share an insight into your work. There was one resource that has already been shared in the chat. That is the Your Best Friend resource and also campaign. Love this website. It's about peer-to-peer support and how to talk to your friends about partner violence they might be experiencing. Love it. Check it out. I would go ahead, Carolina, with one of the first questions, which is actually from the chat. And I was wondering, and I know this is not the focus of your research, but maybe do you have some insights that you can share around the perpetrators of this violence that you were talking about, specifically the intimate partner violence between young people?
Yeah. So, like I said, in our research, many of our young people shared the same school with the person who had been abusive to them in their intimate relationship. So, and that's a really difficult thing, I think, because of course these young boys, and they're usually boys, not always, but often, they also have a right to an education. So it's not like we can, just sort of ask them not to come to school tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. They also have a right to an education. But then, of course, you have to find ways for these young victims to also, and I'm sorry, I'm using now victims. I might even say the word perpetrator. I think these are very problematic terms, but I'm using them now to make it a bit easier in our discussions. But of course, these young people have to feel safe in school to be able to learn. We cannot allow this to happen to them. At the same time, he also needs also have a right to an education. And in our countries, at least, it's very difficult to have a young person, like, place them somewhere else in another school. It's really, really difficult to do that. So it's not really the solution here, I think, if it's not in very extreme cases, sort of. So, yeah, so I don't have any simple answer. There's no simple answers to this, of course.
So one question that came up during the sign up is, do you also have some insights into children experiencing domestic violence and how that impacts their education at an earlier level than school? So for example, in kindergartens with a younger age group, 3 to 6 years old.
Yeah, I know. I saw that, Kim, and I'm so glad someone asked that about the youngest children. I've done some research on the youngest one when it comes to domestic violence and abuse, but not when it comes to kindergarten and their learning and playing. I haven't done, you know what? I haven't seen one single study that focus on kindergarten and young. The age group 4 to 7, 3 to 7, it's like, there's very few studies that includes that young children, also because of the ethics of it, that it's difficult to have the ethical boards to allow us to do research, which includes those young children. But I would love to do that study to see how it affects their learning and playing in that early age. Yeah.
So maybe the question that the person who asked the question, who's working in a kindergarten, can actually give us some feedback if she has some experiences. There's another question that came up in the chat, which is also really interesting, about the impact of other pupils knowing about a student's experiences of, in this case, well, abuse. So I guess experiencing abuse or at home or intimate partner violence. So how that impacts the survivor or the victim of that violence, and whether you have any idea how teachers or schools could manage that issue.
At the beginning of when you talked, you disappeared for a few seconds, so I lost the first half of it. Can you just say that again?
And I thought I had a good internet connection. It's around, so the question is, how significant is the impact of other pupils in the school knowing about this abuse? How does that affect the survivor victim?
So I was sort of just briefly touching upon that in my presentation. I think that's a really, really good question. I'm very concerned about all these young people who carry around these heavy secrets. And I think we need to talk to both children and young people about carrying secrets. What kind of secrets can you carry, and what secrets do you need to tell other adults about? And so I find that's really problematic. And there's so much in our research that I find difficult when I hear about, obviously. But one of the most difficult parts, perhaps, is that when you hear about how these young people also get problems in their friendships and relationship with their peers because of this violence, how they get bad reputation. And like this one girl said that people had this idea that she liked to be hit, and that she was promiscuous somehow. All these things now swirling around, and that gives these young people a sort of a bad reputation, and that can take a long time for them to sort of build up again. So the whole relationship with other peers, I think it's really important to focus on as well, both in terms of the young people having lots of destroyed or negatively affected relationships, but also that these other young people carry these secrets and are unsure of how to handle them, really.
Thank you. So there's just different levels of education that like teachers need to be aware of and that they need to work on with students, which I have such respect for everything that needs to happen in schools. It's just, it's really quite amazing.
Can I just comment on that, Anna?
Yes,
what you just
please.
said?
Yeah.
Because and I do too, a lot of respect. And I know now, perhaps even some of our people who listen today and other times when I speak to teachers and schools, that they get a bit overwhelmed sometimes because we throw so much on schools. We tell them to do this and that, and they're thinking to themselves, when am I going to have time to teach math? If I need to talk about healthy relationships also. So this becomes another layer, another task that they need to handle, and it's a bit daunting to them, and I can certainly understand that. At the same time, children who have been lying awake during the night because they've heard their fathers being violent to their mothers, they cannot do math 8 o'clock in the morning because they're exhausted and stressed out. So the violence affects schooling so much. So you can't really sort of block out all these other things and just say this has nothing to do with school, because it does. So we have to, in order for these young people to be able to learn.
Speaking to that feeling of being overwhelmed, which, to be honest, I'm not a teacher, I can relate to it anyway. When you were in your research, did you also speak to educators and get a feeling from them around how they see the topic,
in this latest study I have on sexual IPV, we have talked to teachers, but it's a bit premature for me to say anything. But I've been talking to teachers for 30 years about my research. I've been lecturing a lot to teachers, students, and to teachers. So I've had for many years discussions with them about this topic, and that's why I said what I just said. I know that they can experience that this is another thing that they're obligated to do when they don't have time, and they work so long hours and all of that. And I have such respect for that. But then also, I think that we need to understand that teachers are really child experts. They are experts. They have a whole university or college education when it comes to children and adolescents. So they know children, they know adolescents. And most of them that I meet are very engaged in children's lives. And they really want to do something about this, and they really want to be important in these children's lives. So I think there's a lot of hope when it comes to that. And the interesting thing is that when we ask young people about their teachers, they have so many good things to say about teachers. So there's really a lot to hope when it comes to that, I think. Yeah.
So maybe also that teachers don't need to feel necessarily too shy about also touching upon these topics, because they can be really positive.
Yes, and you
Role
don't need to
models.
be a child psychiatrist to do important things in these children's lives. Teachers provide so much important things for these children, like routines and of course an education, but much more than that. So they are super important in these children's lives, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So there's 3 questions in the chat currently. One is actually about exposure to pornography and whether you have any insights from your studies around how that affects this abuse and violence that young people are experiencing.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I think we need to do a lot more research on pornography in relation to violence and abuse. I've done a little bit of work on that. I published an article together with Nikki Stanley and other colleagues in the UK on pornography and youth intimate partner violence. So I'd be happy to share that reference if that person is interested. Yes.
Please send it to me and I'll be happy. I'm going to send out resources after the event, so I'll include that. There's one question which I know you felt a little bit nervous about, but asking around, no, well, nervous is maybe the wrong word, because obviously you know what you're talking about, but whether there's any concrete actions that a teacher could take towards a student who's affected by abuse.
Yes, of course, there's many things that they can do, but like what I just said is that I think their function in children's lives sort of is important in itself. I have interviewed so many children who think that their teachers don't know anything about their situation. And then I know that the teachers do know, because if the children are in shelters, then the teachers do know that they actually have a secret address and everything. So, but that the kids don't know. So, okay, so what I'm trying to say is that, okay, one suggestion, talk to the child, let the child know that you do know that they live in a shelter, for example, or in a difficult life situation, you know, present yourself as a person that they can come to. I think that's really important. At the same time, of course, teachers have an obligation in Sweden and Norway to report to the child protection services. So you need to be clear about that, of course, that you do have that in your professional role, but also that you are there for that child. I think that's one first step. And then, like I said before, not to be so afraid that you don't have the necessary expertise. Most teachers have a lot of expertise that is so important for these children. So I think to be more secure in yourself, that you do have something really important to give to these children. Yeah.
Thank you. So be courageous. You
yes,
can do
absolutely.
It.
and talk to the children. Let them know that you know that there's that there's difficult things happening in their lives. Yeah.
But I mean, you are touching on something that's really, really difficult, which is in Germany as well. If you know that a child is experiencing abuse, you need to share that with Child Protective Services. And, you know, and so many children are afraid that they're going to be the cause of something bad to happen to their family if they disclose that violence. So you're touching about something that is so, so difficult. So, yeah, no solution, but just acknowledging how daunting that can be. So
of course, I forget to comment on that, because of course, then sometimes you need to do things as a teacher that child will not agree upon and not be happy about, but that's your obligation to do that, and that can save that child's life. So it's a really important task that they have to report in our countries, at least. Yeah.
No, and you can't underestimate, that's what we're talking about today. You can't underestimate the effects that this experience of violence has on a child's life in the long term. So your intervention, while in the short term might have negative, in quotation marks, influence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that in the long term, this is saving something, you know, saving somebody. So there's a question around statistics. About how many children who also, so this is young people who are using intimate partner violence actually also experience violence in their home.
Yes, yes, they do.
Okay,
Yes.
do you know
Yes.
any numbers?
Oh yes, I can send articles on that. There's no stronger link than like, okay, when we do our studies on youth intimate partner violence, we ask about all kinds of experiences that these kids had in their upbringing. There's no stronger link than between experiencing domestic violence as a child, seeing or witnessing, experiencing a father's violence, and then links to being exposed yourself as a teenager or exposing someone else. So there's a really strong connection there. And I think we have that in our, there's many studies who show that. So it's one of those really solid research findings, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Which actually leads into the second question, which is the impact of violence in the lives of those using the violence on their education, because I imagine there's also, yeah.
Yes, I can't. Yes, for sure. Although I have not been able to do that many studies, I haven't been able to include that many young people in my studies who have used violence themselves. I would have loved to. It's difficult to find them and have them as informants in our studies. But for sure, I can only imagine when I hear about, especially what the girls tells us about. They're mostly girls. I think to myself, these are very troubled young men who, of course, also have difficulties with their education. So, but that's really all I can say because I haven't been able to include them in my studies. Yeah.
So one comment that Steve shared in the link is that he likes that you picked up on survivors' strengths, which is, for example, the children going home and trying to protect their mothers from abuse, and that it's important to look at the context of why a child might be missing at school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Why doesn't a child want to go home after school? Why are they sort of staying on at the schoolyard, biking around, lap after lap? Why do they do that? What's, and just ask that question. So, what's going on? Is there a reason why you don't want to go home tonight? Just asking those questions. But survival skills, absolutely. Oh, I could talk a lot about that. I had one of my PhD students wrote a whole thesis on that, on strategies that the kids did, what the kids actually did themselves to learn what survival skills they had.
I'm just looking at the chat. Jasmine is asking that please share the articles that you mentioned. So we will. And then Laura shared that most of the young men that they work with have used violence against their partners and experienced personal trauma. Sorry, that was read the sentence before you start saying it. So she underlines what you've been sharing about those resources from a practice perspective. Jasmine, bye. Thank you for joining us. So we're through all of the questions that have been shared in the chat and in the sign up. I have a question that I love asking anybody that I interview, which is, doing your research, what was the most surprising thing to you? What was like, where you're like, I mean, you've done it for a while, so I imagine those moments are becoming less and less, but maybe there's one that you can share with us.
One thing was what I just touched upon now, what the kids do themselves and how much work and effort and energy they put into every day in school to make sure that they learn and they can play. Like I said, this one student of mine, Sabren Selvik, did amazing work on that, interviewing kids who lived in shelters for abused women and children, and what they did during the school day to make sure that they learn. And it was amazing. And I've done work on this for many years. And what the kids told us, how they were like, for example, running, and I did write about that in the expert paper, running around, the schoolyard over and over and over and over again until they got so exhausted and got all these difficult thoughts blocked out of their head so they could go in and actually focus on math, this one girl, she wrote down all the intrusive thoughts, because that's one of the difficulties that these kids have, that they struggle with, is all these intrusive thoughts. She wrote them down on little notes, and then she went outside in the schoolyard and put little notes in the bushes, so she could like leave them there and then go back in and focus on schoolwork. These kids are amazing at finding ways to learn and thrive and have fun, although their lives are chaotic. I get so inspired by that when I talk to and interview children who tell us about this. And also, of course, teenagers, they have their ways of doing this, but they all work hard to learn. And then we need to support them in that. That's what I said, that we can't let them fend for themselves. We need to support them. And if I can just say that, if they're another thing about what teachers can do, these kids often have gaps in their schooling. The younger kids, because perhaps they move between shelters and it takes time, they live, they have to flee, and so they get big gaps in their schooling, or because they have to stay home and make sure that their mothers are not beaten or killed, or the teenage girl who is too fearful to go to school because he is there. They get gaps. And it's so easy that if you start getting those gaps, that you fall behind, and it becomes more or less impossible for them to, pick up again. So if, as a teacher, you can think about, what can I do to support that child when he or she comes back to school after being away for a while? What kind of extra resources does my school have to support these kids to, help out perhaps extra hours with schoolwork or home, whatever, all these resources that you might have. What can I do to make sure that that child doesn't fall behind? And you will do such important work for that child to actually prosper and do well later in life, if you can do that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We are once again perfectly on time. So unless anybody has a question they would like to ask, I would go ahead and Carolina, give you a free evening to enjoy as you might, with more appointments.
Yeah.
But a big thank you for sharing your amazing expertise with us. Once again, it was a big pleasure having you. We have the recording of the event. We have the slides that you were kind enough to let us share. So thank you, Carolina.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And my colleague Antonia, and it's disappearing fast because everybody's saying thank you, but my colleague Antonia just shared a link to a feedback form in the chat. And I know we don't like feedback forms. I don't like them either, but this is important for our funders. So if you, and also our quality assurance, not only the funders. Yes, Antonia, sorry. So if you would be so kind to open the link that Antonia shared in the chat and go ahead and fill out that feedback form. Virginia, thank you for the applause right back at you. Thank you for joining us. So before you leave the event, I would ask you to please fill out the feedback form. We love positive feedback. We also love constructive, critical feedback. So please share any thoughts that you might have. To be honest, I always prefer critical feedback. Jody, you just shared something in the chat. You found it very useful. Thank you. And they're a healthy relationships team who goes into schools and colleges. Such important work supporting teachers so they don't have to do everything. Thank you. Thank you for that work, Jody. That's amazing. So I would ask all of you to, Antonia, could you share the link one more time in the chat, please? Thank you very much. So the link that was just shared in the chat, please go ahead and open that, and I will actually save the chat so I have all of the amazing resources that you shared in the chat. And now I am going to end this event. Thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned before, I'll be sending out an email and with resources and also a link to our website where you can also sign up to our event mailing page, event mailing list, where we send out all of the events that we do. So maybe see you soon. And thank you, Antonia, for the technical support. So enjoy your evening, everybody. Bye.